The phantoms of the Veil did not conquer worlds with kinetic rounds or plasma lances. They conquered with fear. They were a species of pure psionic energy, ethereal and almost invisible, their forms shimmering like heat haze in the void. Their technology was an extension of their minds, manipulating reality through complex psychic projections. Their fleets were not ships of steel, but shimmering, semi-corporeal constructs that phased in and out of existence, impervious to conventional weaponry. Their primary weapon, however, was psychological. The Phantoms, through their unified psionic network, could delve into the deepest, most primal fears of any sentient species. They would project these terrors directly into the minds of their enemies, not as illusions, but as hyper-realistic, sanity-shattering hallucinations that paralyzed fleets and shattered armies. Worlds fell before them without a single shot fired, their inhabitants driven mad by visions of their own species-specific horrors. For centuries, the Phantoms had swept through the known galaxy, leaving behind a trail of abandoned, fear-haunted ruins. The Galaxial Concordat, a loose alliance of 1,000 species, had tried to fight them. They had built ships with psionic dampeners, designed weapons that could disrupt energy forms, but nothing worked. The Phantoms simply bypassed their defenses, slipped into the minds of their crews, and unleashed the symphony of terror. Commanders saw their ships consumed by impossible entities, soldiers saw their comrades melt into grotesque forms, and entire populations descended into catatonia or mass hysteria. Admiral Lyra, a Lumina ascendant whose light body shimmered with barely contained despair, addressed the Concordat High Council. Another 12 systems have fallen. The reports are consistent. No material damage, only psychological collapse. The Viridian fleets are adrift, their crews driven insane by visions of their sun turning black. The Grochnar legions on Xylos 4 simply dropped their weapons and began screaming, their collective consciousness shattered. We have no defense against them. General Craxus, a burly Cathar, slammed a six-limbed fist on the table. How do you fight an enemy that feeds on your mind? How do you strike at a foe that is not truly there? The Concordat's military psychologists, after countless failed attempts to understand the Phantoms, concluded that their psionic architecture was simply too advanced, too alien to be countered. Their power was absolute. All that remained was to build faster ships, to evacuate as many as possible before the inevitable, horrifying wave of psychic terror reached their home systems. It was in this atmosphere of utter desperation that a small, highly unusual human research team, led by the enigmatic Dr. Aris Thorne, requested an audience. Thorne was known for his eccentric theories, his focus on the more peculiar aspects of human psychology. His current project, Project Chimera, had been largely ignored by the Terran military, seen as an academic curiosity rather than a strategic asset. Honored members of the Concordat, Thorne began, his voice calm, even as the psychic whispers of the distant Phantoms caused faint tremors in the chamber. We understand the Phantom's weapon. It is fear. They project the deepest, most primal terrors into the minds of their enemies. He paused, a faint, almost mischievous smile playing on his lips. But what if fear isn't always terrifying? What if, for some species, fear can be entertainment? He then displayed a series of holographic projections, images of ancient human horror films, excerpts from terrifying novels, the intricate designs of human video games depicting grotesque monsters, and historical records of humanity's fascination with ghosts, demons, and serial killers. For millennia, Thorne continued, humanity has voluntarily sought out, consumed, and even celebrated fear. We construct elaborate narratives of horror, pay money to be frightened, and then we discuss them, dissect them, and create even more terrifying ones. We have, in essence, inoculated ourselves. We have built up a massive collective psychological immunity to manufactured horror. Our minds are not easily shattered by specters or imagined abominations, because we have spent centuries perfecting the art of imagining them ourselves. My proposal, Thorne concluded, his eyes blazing with conviction, is to deploy Project Chimera. We cannot defeat the Phantom's power, but we can deny them their weapon. We can show them a species that not only does not fear their horrors, but finds them quaint, or even, dare I say it, boring. The Concordate High Council stared, bewildered. These humans were suggesting that their strange, self-inflicted obsession with imaginary monsters could somehow counter an existential psychic threat. It was a concept as alien as the Phantoms themselves. But then again, humanity was nothing if not alien in its approach to everything, and they were truly, hopelessly desperate. Project Chimera was a classified Terran initiative, a collection of humanity's most brilliant, often eccentric minds, united by their expertise in one specific field, horror. Its recruits were not soldiers, but authors, game designers, film directors, psychologists specializing in fear response, and even professional critics of horror media. Their mission: to understand, categorize, and ultimately weaponize humanity's unique relationship with terror. Lead field operative, Major Eva Rostova, a grimly practical woman who had endured a childhood filled with cheap jump-scare movies and cosmic horror novels, was assigned to lead the first combat deployment. She was a no-nonsense soldier, but also a connoisseur of the macabre. The Phantoms, using their psychic networks, could generate perfect, targeted fears. For the insectoid Groknar, they projected images of immense, suffocating webs. For the crystalline Lumina, they showed visions of their light forms dissolving into discordant chaos. For humanity, the Phantoms had prepared a special symphony. Their probes had detected humanity's deep-seated anxieties: environmental collapse, nuclear war, existential loneliness, and the fear of grotesque, impossible entities. The first major confrontation was on the desolate moon of Perseus 7, where a small Terran reconnaissance fleet was attempting to gather data on Phantom movements. A Phantom Harbinger ship appeared, its shimmering form radiating an aura of dread. It unleashed its psychic barrage, targeting the human crews. On the Rife bridge of the Terran flagship, the Invictus, a wave of primal terror washed over the crew. Soldiers flinched, some whimpered. Commander Rostova felt a chilling dread as her mind tried to conjure images of her greatest fears: the silent void, the collapse of civilization, the utter solitude of death. But then a strange thing happened. Young ensign, barely out of the academy, suddenly snorted, then let out a small, embarrassed chuckle. "Is that really all they've got?" The ensign, like many of his generation, had grown up with hyper-realistic VR horror simulations, where players routinely faced down eldritch abominations far more visually detailed and psychologically insidious than what the Phantoms were projecting. "That's just a generic tentacle monster with too many eyes," another crewman muttered, a critical edge to his voice. "The texture mapping on its skin is amateurish. And the existential dread effect? Too on the nose, no subtlety." The Phantoms, in their cold, logical assessment, projected a fear response based on primal human archetypes. They showed terrifying monsters, impossible landscapes, the ultimate destruction of the self. But they didn't understand the human capacity for critique. They didn't understand that humanity had spent centuries improving upon these very fears, refining them, making them truly disturbing. The Phantom's nightmares were, by human standards, simply not very good. Rostova felt the fear subside, replaced by a wave of annoyance. Their cosmic horror seems to be based entirely on mid-20th century Earth fiction, she projected to her command staff. Honestly, it's a bit derivative. Where's the subtle psychological torment, the truly insidious corruption of the soul. This is just jump scares. The Phantom's psychic weapon was met not with screams, but with bored sighs and critical reviews. The sheer, utter lack of terror from the human crews was, to the Phantoms, incomprehensible. Their psychic barrage, designed to shatter minds, simply sputtered out, unable to find purchase in minds that had already processed, dissected, and found wanting far greater horrors. The Invictus continued its mission, completely unimpeded. The Phantom Harbinger ship, its psionic power draining with no effect, phased out of existence, bewildered. The Fear Eaters had arrived. The first successful encounter with the Phantom sent a shock wave through the Concordat. Humans were, inexplicably, immune to the enemy's primary weapon. Dr. Thorne's Project Chimera was immediately given carte blanche. Its mission was expanded, not just to analyze, but to counter the Phantoms. The Phantoms, still trying to comprehend humanity's immunity, increased the intensity and complexity of their psychic attacks. They probed deeper into the human psyche, trying to find a primal fear that resonated. They conjured visions of a silent, empty universe, of genetic corruption, of the ultimate betrayal of loved ones. But humanity, in its bizarre collective experience, had already encountered these concepts. There were entire genres of human fiction dedicated to exactly these fears. Our minds, pre-processed by countless stories, films, and games, had already built neural pathways for dealing with these exact scenarios. On the Chimera Prime, a specially designed psionic counter-warfare vessel staffed by Project Chimera personnel, a team of human nightmare architects began their work. They were not just immune, they were actively engaged with the Phantom's projections. Their latest existential dread projection is much better than the last, mused Eliza Vance, a renowned horror novelist, as the bridge crew briefly recoiled from a vision of the universe collapsing into a single, screaming point of despair. The color palette is exquisite, very evocative of our pre-FTL dark matter theories. But the sound design is still a little weak, needs more nuanced resonance frequencies. Her colleague, a former game designer named Jax, nodded. Agreed. And the pacing is off. They hit us with the climax too soon. There's no build-up, no sense of creeping dread, no slow reveal of the true horror. It's all shock and awe, no lingering psychological damage. The Chimera Prime began to broadcast its own psionic counter-signals. It wasn't an attack. It was a critique. It broadcast back-filtered analyses of the Phantom's fear projections, pointing out their cliches, their lack of originality, their predictable reliance on tropes that humanity had long since moved past. It was essentially a collective human groan of disappointment in the face of what was supposed to be ultimate terror. The effect on the Phantoms was subtle, but profound. Their unified consciousness, designed for optimal fear projection, began to register a new emotion from humanity: disappointment. The prey was not afraid, it was bored. This was an anomaly of catastrophic proportions. Commander Rostova, leading a strike force against a Phantom staging ground, observed the bizarre phenomenon. Their fear projection field is weakening around our ships. They're diverting psionic power, trying to understand our critiques. They're trying to improve their nightmares. The Phantoms, in their cold, alien logic, were trying to adapt. They were trying to create a fear that would affect humanity. But they were entering a game. They could never win. They were trying to out-imagine a species that had perfected the art of self-terrorization over millennia. The war shifted. The Concordat, no longer paralyzed by fear, began to push back. Human ships, their crews calmly analyzing and even enjoying, the Phantom's increasingly desperate attempts at terror moved through the enemy lines with impunity. The Phantoms, in a desperate attempt to find a weakness, began to target other species within the Concordat, focusing their most potent fears on them. But Project Chimera had anticipated this. Human fear analysts had spent weeks with allied species, cataloging their specific phobias, their cultural anxieties, their deepest, most primal terrors. They then created psychic counterwards, bespoke psychic constructs designed to filter and redirect the Phantom's fear projections, or in some cases, to replace them with something else entirely. For the Grocknar, who feared suffocation by webs, the human counterwards projected images of vast open plains and clear skies. For the Lumina, images of perfect, harmonious light. The humans weren't just immune, they were actively deflecting the Phantom's weapon. But the most devastating human counter-tactic was for the Phantoms themselves. Project Chimera began to broadcast targeted psionic feedback. It wasn't fear, it was disassembly. "We've analyzed their psychic architecture," Dr. Thorne explained to a fascinated, if slightly horrified, concordant council. "Their unified consciousness is built on perfectly aligned thought patterns, a symphony of pure logical will. But what if that harmony was disrupted?" The Chimera Prime began to broadcast complex, multi-layered psionic signals. It was not a language. It was a deconstruction. It took the elements of the Phantom's own fear projections, the subtle energy signatures, the vibrational frequencies of their psychic pulses, and then it broadcast them back, but subtly altered. It inverted the emotional resonance, shifted the meaning, introduced dissonant harmonics. It was like taking a perfect, beautiful song and replaying it backward, with every note slightly off-key, the tempo subtly wrong, the melody a twisted, maddening parody of itself. For the Xylos Collective, this was an assault on the very fabric of their being. Their unified minds, designed for logical and harmonious thought, were being bombarded by pure, unadulterated nonsense. Their perfect unity began to fray. Individual phantoms, mere extensions of the greater whole, began to experience isolated, fragmented thoughts, an anomaly unprecedented in their history. As the war progressed, the phantoms, for the first time in their existence, began to experience something akin to confusion, then frustration, then a profound existential terror of their own. Their weapon, fear, was useless. Their targets were not only immune, but actively critiquing their efforts. And now, their own minds were being subtly, insidiously disassembled by the very energy they projected. Grand Phantom Overmind, the central consciousness of the Phantoms, struggled to comprehend. They are processing our fear. They are not breaking. They are analyzing. They are improving upon our creations. They are turning our ultimate weapon into a lesson. The ultimate psychological blow came when Project Chimera, under the artistic direction of Eliza Vance, launched its most ambitious counter-projection, the human mindscape. It was a multi-sensory psionic broadcast designed to represent the true, unfiltered chaos of the human psyche. It wasn't a single fear. It was everything. It was the simultaneous experience of joy and sorrow, love and hate, terror and exhilaration. It was the crushing weight of existential dread alongside the absurdity of a slapstick comedy. It was the beauty of a sunset juxtaposed with the grotesque imagery of a forgotten nightmare. It was the cacophony of 1,000 internal monologues, a symphony of conflicting desires, a swirling maelstrom of irrationality, creativity, and self-destructive impulses. The Phantoms, whose collective mind was built on perfect harmony and logical order, were utterly overwhelmed. They had spent millennia trying to project terror. They had never encountered a species that contained a universe of it within themselves, processed it, and then weaponized it. The human mindscape wasn't designed to terrify the Phantoms. It was designed to make them understand, on a primal, incomprehensible level, the sheer, unbridled, beautiful insanity of the human mind. It was designed to show them a horror so vast, so complex, so utterly beyond their comprehension that it would shatter their very concept of reality. The Grand Phantom Overmind, a being that had once experienced perfect unity, felt individual, thoughts fragmenting, screaming, dissolving into pure, unadulterated noise. It was not fear. It was chaos. It was the horrifying realization that its perfect, logical existence was meaningless in the face of this unpredictable, irrational, and utterly terrifying species. The Phantoms retreated. They didn't surrender. They simply vanished. Their shimmering fleets phased out of concordate space, never to return. The war ended, not with a bang, but with a bewildered, terrified silence. The Phantoms, the ultimate, purveyors of fear, had encountered a species that was a far greater master of the subject. They had encountered the Fear Eaters. In the aftermath, the galaxy tried to understand what had happened. Humanity, the young, chaotic species, had defeated an enemy that had crippled entire civilizations. They had done so not with superior firepower, but with a unique, morbid curiosity and a profound understanding of their own internal demons. Dr. Eris Thorne became a galactic legend, his theories on human psychology now studied by every major species. Project Chimera, though its combat mission was over, continued its research, delving deeper into the bizarre and often terrifying landscape of the human mind. Commander Rostova, now an admiral, oversaw the demobilization of the Fear Eaters. They were not just soldiers. They were artists, philosophers, and, above all, the ultimate connoisseurs of terror. The Concordate, while grateful for humanity's victory, remained wary. They had seen the true power of the human psyche, and it was a power that both awed and deeply unnerved them. They had witnessed a species that could not only face down ultimate terror, but absorb it, critique it, and then turn it back on its creators. Years passed. The galaxy rebuilt. The threat of the Phantoms became a chilling legend, a cautionary tale of the terrors that lurked in the void. Humanity continued its chaotic, vibrant existence, but the war had left its mark. The members of Project Chimera, the Nightmare Architects, carried a unique burden. They had delved into the deepest recesses of the human psyche and had, in turn, been exposed to the full, unfiltered terror of the Phantoms. They were heroes, but they were also different. They saw the world through a lens that understood the subtle horrors beneath the surface, the whispers of dread in the mundane. Eliza Vance, the horror novelist, wrote her greatest works after the war, stories that truly captured the intricate, layered terrors of the human condition, far surpassing the crude attempts of the Phantoms. Jax, the game designer, created immersive psychological thrillers that pushed the boundaries of emotional engagement, making players confront their deepest fears, not with jump scares, but with insidious, creeping dread. Dr. Thorne, in his later years, often reflected on the true meaning of the Fear Eaters. It wasn't just about immunity. It was about mastery. Humanity, a species that had evolved with a potent imagination, had, over millennia, learned to control its own fear. We had domesticated our nightmares, turned them into stories, into art, into a source of strange, unsettling entertainment. When the Phantoms unleashed their primal terrors, they were not showing humanity anything new. They were simply showing us a poorly executed version of our own internal landscape. And humanity, in its bizarre, beautiful, and utterly terrifying way, had simply turned to the Phantoms and said, "We can do better." The galaxy learned a profound lesson. Never underestimate a species that willingly seeks out the dark. Never underestimate a people who find joy in confronting their own monsters. For in that strange, paradoxical relationship with fear, humanity had forged an unbreakable shield, and an even more terrifying weapon, We were not merely survivors of terror. We were its masters. We were its creators. And if necessary, we would always be its devourers.